Hello, everyone. Terrific to have you. This is me. Very brief background. I've been teaching for 20 years, mostly in autism education settings. This is me. I used to be the hunter tiger at the school for autistic students that I used to work at in Newcastle. And now I work for Positive Partnerships. And my interest for a long time has been in how technology can support our students, but I'm interested first and foremost in the ideas beneath that. Is it useful? What's the ethics of this space? What does student voice tell us? That's the stuff that I'm really interested in. And hopefully that's going to inform our discussion this evening. I'll share briefly just two little comics that might help to illustrate a little bit of how I'm thinking about AI in the inclusion space at the moment. We can see here a three-panel comic. The first panel, we've got a student who's climbing up a ladder. They're doing it pretty easy. They're going up the rungs. It's a successful endeavor. They seem well suited for the ladder, no trouble. The second panel, we've got a same student. They're climbing a ladder. The rungs are very far apart. It looks like to me the ladder wasn't designed for this student. They're really going to struggle to find success here. If we look at the third panel, we've got a ladder that did have rungs that were very far spaced apart, but now we've got a helpful little robot here who's putting some digital rungs into the ladder, spaced so that they are designed for where the student is at. The robot, the AI robot, is not carrying the student, not completing the climbing task for the student. It's just putting supports, scaffolds in place to hopefully allow the student to find success in climbing that ladder. And that's very much how I think about the role of AI. Of course, all of us from a universal design for learning standpoint want to design our ladders or our classroom learning experiences to be for the student and to be well structured for what the student needs. But we know that there are many instances in which we don't have control over that. And if AI can provide extra support and success for students in those circumstances, that's what I'm really interested in. I'm also really interested in this. If anyone's familiar with education technology and the implementation of it in schools, there's this acronym SEMA, which talks about, are you using technology just as a substitute for something, that you don't really need the technology for, but you're just trying to use it anyway? Is the technology augmenting what's going on? Is it modifying the task? Or at its highest level, is technology redefining the very possibilities of this learning experience? Is it really restructuring the whole thing? And that's where this comic is another way of thinking about AI. In the first panel, we've got a student with a camera. They're photographing plants. They're going to look them up in their plant guide. In the second picture there, we've got a student with a tablet. They've got AI hooked up. They're photographing flowers, and it's in real time telling the student the name of the flower, the scientific name, might be giving other information as well. It's quite a redefining experience. So in this way, technology can not only be a way of scaffolding and supporting and filling in the gaps of the learning experience for students, but it can also potentially be redefining the very nature of how students learn and what they do. So that's a little bit of grounding for what I'm interested in this space. I'm going to give you the structure of what we're going to do across this session this evening. I'm going to share some very brief thoughts, and I promise I'll keep them brief, about AI and education, because what I want the bulk of our time to be invested in is really looking at 4 tools that I'm going to do some demonstrations of that I hope are going to be useful for the sort of autism education, inclusion-focused work that we're all interested in. And those are the Universal Sandpit, which is a free web platform that I've created. ChatGPT, of course, one of the leading AI tools. I'm going to show you a little bit about that that might be a bit different to what you've otherwise seen. I'm going to show you a platform called Chalk that's all about creating visual learning resources for students, and then AOA, which is a visual mind mapping tool that uses AI in some really interesting ways. And around that, we'll talk about some other things as well. And of course, if you've got things in the chat box that you'd like to talk about and mention, please let me know there as well. All right, so let's start with this. Some brief thoughts on AI and education, with the context that this is from a perspective of educating autistic students with that framework of neurodiversity affirming in the context of inclusive education. Like that's sort of really what we're going for there. So I'll show you a little, another comic or a painting, I guess, in this case. I think one of the things that I'm particularly interested in sharing and for you to have a think about too is that I think there's a very big difference in the way that AI is used from those who have a level of mastery over a subject that AI is supporting, compared with people who are still developing their skills and growing their skills. And by that, I'm essentially saying AI as used by adults, by teachers, by parents who already have a mastery of academic attainment or just different life skills that you've already got mastery of, that's very different to a brain that's developing and growing and acquiring skills. And I say that because often one of the questions that comes up in these conversations is what sort of tools, what sort of AI tools should teachers be using? And when should students start to use AI tools, if at all? And my answer is not a cut and dry one. What I want to do is tell you some little stories about the way that AI can tap into this space in different ways that hopefully will open up some of your thinking too. So this is a little story straight out of real life. So I've got two kids, one's 16 and one's 6. And my 6-year-old, he's just learning to draw. He's learning to tell stories. He's just getting creative with all of that kind of thing. And he drew this little character and he loves the game Minecraft. And he said to me, because he knows about AI, he knows AI exists. He says, "I'd love to see what my character looks like in Minecraft. Can you get AI to put my character in the game?" So I did. And with ChatGPT, it rendered a really beautiful looking version of his character now in the Minecraft world. And he loved it. And he's like looking at it and all excited. But then I had the immediate thought that have I just stopped my son from ever wanting to draw again, from ever wanting to get better at art by just showing him that with the push of a button, you can create something incredible and you actually don't need to get better at drawing, because the computer will do it for you. I thought if that's the lesson I've just taught my son, then I don't want to use AI for this sort of thing at all. But what happened next, which was very interesting to me, is he looked at this picture and then he started to tell all these stories about imagining his character in the Minecraft world. And he's like, can we make a comic book? And he wanted to draw other little stories and then he wanted to act them out around the house. And so what this did was actually turn on his mind in a different way to be creative and inventive in other capacities. And I share that to say, like so many things with AI, nothing's black and white. On the one hand, absolutely, I never want AI to take away my son's joy of drawing and that challenge of getting better. I don't want it for that. But I am interested if it can stimulate his storytelling abilities and spur him on in all sorts of other interesting ways. So again, I think we've got to be thoughtful and not too black and white about its applications at times. This is another example, some students that I was working with drawing little animals, and they were a class who loved Pokemon, and so they wanted to get AI to turn their sketches into beautifully polished, intellectually copyright infringing versions of Pokemon characters. And they did that, and then they printed these cards out, cut them out, and played Pokemon in class with their own Pokemon characters. And we know students who'd be so enchanted by this and who have a passion for Pokemon. They'd be like, this is the best thing ever. Again, I'm kind of leaving the door open for this exploration of interests and creativity, but again, within that understanding that we don't want to confuse having a level of mastery over a subject matter and what you can do with that when you use AI compared to when children are still developing and growing. I think those are thoughtful conversations that we need to have. The other thing that I'd say too, before we get into some practical stuff, is the accessibility conversation is still evolving, and our literacy around accessibility is still something that when you go into schools and you're working with different students and educators and families, it's still not something that everyone has a full confidence in at its current state. I mean, anyone who's worked in a special education environment will have used these sort of laminated Velcro visuals for groceries and visual timetables. But we know over the past 10, 20 years, there's been all these wonderful apps, ChoiceWorks, MyComs, that have done visual supports, visual timetables on mobile devices. There's so many built-in accessibility tools for text to speech and speech to text and all these great ways of interacting with tech. And yet we know, like, so many classrooms are not making the most of these tools for students who have trouble with handwriting, have trouble getting work down. And now we've got AI. And I guess I'm just sort of framing here the consideration that before we jump feet first into a brand new world of tech, we shouldn't forget all of the other things that we have at our control as well. And that assistive technology, accessibility tools in our tech, they're all still there. They're very powerful. And we want to make sure that all of the stuff we talk about here this evening is used as part of that bigger picture. This is the last thing I'm going to talk to in terms of sort of a bit of theory up front. I still really like this study. In Positive Partnerships, we refer to it a lot. It's on the Inclusion Ed website. It's the Australian Educational Needs Analysis. And it was a research study done to find out what do autistic students themselves describe as their difficulties at school. In chat box, Mari, absolutely. I'll show you about AI for social stories in just a moment. That's a great one. So we'll put a pin in that one. So these were the top 10 things that came out of this study that autistic students said that they found difficult at school. Now, if we have a little look through there, we can already see that when we start to think about some of the things that AI can naturally do, it's I think it's able to approach and support a lot of the challenges that autistic students say they're describing they face at school. Planning for assignments, AI will naturally break down assignment instructions into chunks or scaffold how to complete assignments. Handwriting, I mean, speech to text, some of these resources have never been better with AI. Doing homework, AI can explain concepts in really simple ways for students to understand, and starting tasks. It's got a lot of really clever task initiation strategies that I'll share too. So I just flagged this because I think within what autistic students are reporting, we've got a really good opportunity to use AI to support some of these things from the start. And these are some of the tools, and I'm going to be doing some demonstrations on these in a moment, that we can use the Universal Sandpit, Goblin tools to break down assignment instructions into chunks, explain concepts in simple ways. And certainly with ChatGPT, we've got a lot of speech to text and task initiation strategies as part of that space as well, which I'm going to show you in a demonstration. Just on the task initiation stuff, because for me, that's a really powerful part of executive functioning. And we know that so many students, when you give them a task, they will sit there and look at it and not quite know how to get started, or if they're at home, struggle to get the motivation to actually get it done. A student, an autistic student, was talking to me about this, and they said, I thought this was absolutely fantastic. They said, I use AI to help motivate me to complete jobs that I keep putting off. So they said, when I've got homework I don't want to do, I say to ChatGPT, I say, help me pretend that I'm a spy and that I only have a certain amount of time to get the work done or it's going to explode. Put me in character and help motivate me. And then ChatGPT starts to role play with the student, and the student gets into that mode of thinking they're a spy. They've got to quickly get their maths homework done in 10 minutes or it's going to blow up. And they said for them, it really motivates them. Like that to me is a very innovative and interesting way to think about the potentials of AI. And I think that sort of stuff's just going to keep on expanding. So that's a little bit of just some brief thoughts and sort of coverage of thinking about AI in this inclusive space. But let's dive into some actual practical stuff now. Let's do some demonstrations of what we've just been talking about. So one of the first tools that I'll show you, and I mean, full disclosure, it's one of mine. It's a platform that I've built. It's just a free website called the Universal Sandpit. And I'll give you a really quick demonstration of how it works because I think it will help to address some of those things that autistic students reported having difficulty with at school. So let's jump out of the presentation and I'm going to jump into the website now. So again, it's on our website. Chris has just shared the link on our Positive Partnerships website, which I'll jump to now. I've got the AI education tools that we've explored in the webinar tonight. So all of the links are here. So it's the top one here, the Universal Sandpit. And if you've not been here, it's just a website. You don't sign up for anything. It's completely free. It's just got all these little buttons of different AI tools that can do different inclusive things in the classroom. And my hope is not that this necessarily is the only thing that you go to and that you use. I know every single school and sector have different AI tools that they're using, but to me, it's more just modeling almost what you can do with AI. Like if I pick just a few examples, student interests is always one of the things in positive partnerships that we say, it's all about how we connect with our students and the relationships we form, trusting educational partnerships with students focused around what they love, if we can embed that in our teaching content. So if we pop in here that we've got a student who loves, how about we do ancient Greek myths, because I've been talking with a student who's that's been their love lately. But the class topic is numeracy. And you might think, how am I going to embed this interest in ancient Greek myths with maths? You click generate ideas, and then AI will bring back different ideas and different ways to try to blend, use ancient Greek measurements such as stadia in measurement activities, have students create their own currency based on ancient Greek coins, convert those to modern currency. And you can do this for anything, it's just going to take an idea, take a passion that the student has and blend it in with a topic that you're teaching in class. Another example, let's take one of the things from um, the the what's it called? The educational needs analysis, planning for assignments, right? So we've got a tool here called assignments. Now, I've had students use this where you can just pop in any assignment, you can pop in, it can be any sort of description. Hey, Ash, chat box, what about students with sensory needs? I'll share something about sensory in about 5 minutes, so I won't forget that. I'll share that with you. So this will break down an assignment into a really nice scaffold for teachers to use in the classroom, but also for students to follow. So what might an assignment be? How about Students need to create a Google Slides presentation about healthy eating habits. They need at least 10 slides to represent different food types and their health benefits. This is straight out of real life, this assignment. So I've just popped push the button there, and what the tool will do is then create a scaffold of this assignment, title of the assignment, create a presentation on healthy eating, the intention to educate about the importance of healthy eating, resources needed, internet, Google Slides, and then it breaks down the step-by-step guide of how to do that assignment. Now, I've also got a version for students, because these are sort of, I think of these as teacher-focused tools, but I've also got a multi-tool for students. I'll show you this just briefly. So this is the multi-tool for students, and they can choose from one of three things. Help me to know how to do this school task, help explain this concept to me, or help me with something social. So say it's help me to do this school task. Say the student's been given a task, write a recount about all the things you did on the weekend. Include pictures and at least 3 paragraphs. Let's go. And it's going to do the same thing, but with a more student-focused response. So it'll say first, start by writing down the date of the weekend. 2, think about the things you did on the weekend, such as going to the park, playing with friends. Once you've got your list of activities, etc. So it's just going to scaffold and break down all the different steps involved in doing that thing, in doing that task. We could also have it explain a concept to us. So say a student's been given some homework about photosynthesis, help explain this concept to me, let's go. And then AI is going to say, well, photosynthesis is when plants use light from the sun to make food from themselves. It's like making a yummy sandwich with ingredients from the grocery store. So it's giving a simplified, way of understanding that concept. So that's another tool. I'll show you just 2 more and then I'll move on, because someone, when I say someone, Mari, asked about social stories. So I've got a little button here on the Universal Sandpit for social scripts, and that will do exactly what you've just mentioned, which is you pop in a social skill that you'd like to generate a social story for, and it will generate it. So say the social skill is it could be asking to join in a game with classmates on the playground at lunchtime. Generate the social script, and it will try and do that sort of person first script. Sometimes during lunchtime, my friends and I like to play games on the playground. I get excited when I see them having fun and I want to join in too. I used to feel nervous, but now I know a good way to do it. First, I need to look at my friends and see what they're playing. Then I can say, can I play too? Or may I join your game? So it's going to create that social script that you can then put into, say, Microsoft Word. You might add images to it, co-author it with the student. But this can just be a way of putting down a structure to start with, overcoming a little bit of writer's block and thinking, well, how do I approach this particular social skill? And it could be anything. It could be managing frustration. It could be, things of different sensitive natures. It will help to get you started, in that space. So I hope that's helpful to share that one there. The other one I'll just very briefly share is this executive functioning tool, which is only new. I've just put this up recently. This is a little executive functioning task analyzer. And what this will do, because I just think, executive functioning is so important, and that it's one of the things I wished I knew better when I started teaching, all the little cognitive processes that I could be scaffolding and supporting for students when they're working, whether they be primary school aged or high school aged. So you can either upload a task, like if you've got a task here for students that you're already using, you can upload it as a Word file, or you can just describe the task. So say we use the recount from earlier. Students write a recount of what they did on the weekend, and the student age is 6. It's just a kindergarten or a year 1 class. When I click Analyze Task, it'll look at the task and then think about all of the executive functioning skills required for that task. It's saying we need to think about planning, organization, working memory, task initiation, persistence, and then it's going to tell you what that is going to involve for the student when they do that task. And here are specific scaffolds the teacher can use to support the executive functioning needs. You might provide a visual timeline for the student to plan out their recount, graphic organizers to help them to organize their thoughts. You might have prompts or cues to jog the student's memory about what they did on the weekend. You might have some time limits for each step, and you're going to offer positive reinforcement. Like that sort of thing to me is really useful for just, and whether you're a really experienced teacher with a lot of mastery in this area, or whether you're a new teacher coming into this space, or family, who are trying to support this stuff at home, it can just be those generating those sort of ideas to get a bit of a portfolio together of what's going to work. So I'm glad to see in the chat box that some of that's resonating. That's great. I'll share with you too. It's not my platform. It's another one called Goblin Tools. And I mean, Goblin Tools has been around for about 2 years now, so you may be familiar with it, but it's got some really wonderful little tools as well. My favorite is the Magic To-Do list. And it works in a similar way, but I really like the way that this website spaces things out. So let's use that same example I keep doing. Write a recount about what you did on the weekend. And then I hit the magic wand, and it's going to now break it down into little tick box items here. So you can see that, first of all, think about what you did on the weekend. All right, I've done that. Now I'll recall where we went or stayed during the weekend. And if there's anything here that I feel like I'd like to go in a bit more deeply into to help to scaffold, like say this one here, think about any noteworthy events or moments that stood out. If a student's struggling with that, you can be like, all right, let's hit the wand. Let's break that down. How do we approach that? Okay, we're going to again reflect on the weekend. Let's recall any specific activities or experiences. What's something that felt significant or memorable? What created a strong emotional response? So just trying to break down little tasks into subtasks to help to give a bit of scaffolding there. And it could be anything. It could be how to make a sandwich, it could be whatever task, it'll do that same sort of job. So you can already see from these sort of bits that have pulled out of the educational needs analysis how AI can start to break things down, chunk things, scaffold, give a bit of guidance. What about some other ways of interacting? Do you know what? I'm going to come back to this. We'll skip this slide for the moment. I want to build on the momentum of that side of teaching and thinking. I'm going to show you two other tools first. One is called Chalk, and then one is called AOA. Chalk is a platform, it's actually based over in Britain, and I share both of these not to say these are the be all and end all of AI tools, but more just to give you an idea of the sort of things that AI is doing in this inclusive space. And we can think then about what's going to work for us, right? So I'll show you Chalk first of all. Chalk, you can see here it says it's going to sort of transform content into accessible diagrams, make learning visual. I'll show you exactly what that means. So it's going to create visual learning resources out of whatever content we give it. Now, we could add text in, we could type in the sort of lesson that we're teaching on the water cycle or Australian history, or we can actually drop in content. So we can actually load a website in or load a YouTube clip. How about this as an example? Say I'm reading a poem to our class. I've got a class of Year 4 students. We're studying Robert Frost. We're going to be doing Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening. So I'm going to copy that YouTube link, pop it into Chalk. It's going to quickly grab the transcription of that poem, which is just done there. And now, what sort of visual would I like? You know what? I'd love to have a storyboard. I want to storyboard this poem out to make it visual for students so we can talk about it in that way. Now, I can choose the style, watercolor, sketch, pencil drawing. I'll stick to watercolor, generate. And what Chalk is going to do is take that poem, think about ways to chunk it into little pieces, and then generate images to go along with that. And then it's going to give you the option to export that as a PowerPoint presentation, export it as Google Slides, or as a printable resource, something to upload to Google Classroom, or whatever's going to be useful for you to use when you're teaching that poem and working on it with students. So let's see how it's done here. I think it's just in its last little phase of thinking. So I was padding for time by talking on top of it. Here we go. Okay, so it's taken the poem and it's broken it into 4 stanzas. You can see the poem here, whose woods these are, I think I know. And it's generated little images. And if the images are not perfect, you can actually scroll through because it generates a number of different options, for what might be more suitable. And then you see you've got these different little visual options. I like this. This illustrates the poem perfectly. Now I can export that to PowerPoint or export that to slides. So again, for autistic students, neurodivergent students who you think I'm wanting to use as many different like teaching modes as possible from like a universal design for learning standpoint. We're going to have audio, we're going to use text, we're going to use visuals. This is the sort of thing that can really help to tap into that space. I'll show you one more example. And in terms of what Chalk can do, it can do all these things. It can create icon stories, slides, create timelines, storyboards, graphics. It's got a lot of things it can do. But I'll just show you one more brief one. What if I want to have visual keywords to do with the history of Newcastle? So I'm working on the history of Newcastle with students. I've got this university blog site. I'm going to copy the web address from that blog, put it into Chalk, web page, add the content there. It grabs the website, drops the content in, and say, yeah, give me the visual keywords, please, of all the key moments in Newcastle's history based on that university blog article. And you can see that did it very quickly. I just want basic icons, which is perfect. And it's gone through and picked out the key moments from that blog and put it into this visual keyword format. And again, if I'm not thrilled with any particular icon, although all these are great, but I could choose different pictures. I could choose, illustrated icons, photos, etc. So it's got different versions. And then from there, again, I can print that, create worksheet, PowerPoint, Google Slides. Again, just ways of visualizing content in different ways. I think so Chalk is nice. I think it's quite a useful platform, and I'd encourage you to check it out as well and just see if there's things there that could work. The last one that I'll share with you is AOA. And this is a visual mind mapping tool that I think is fantastic as well. And I'll bring it up here. So the way that AOA works, and you can do mind maps or task boards or whiteboards, but I'm just going to do a mind map. So my daughter's been studying the poem Ulysses, by Homer. Sorry, the Odyssey, not James Joyce's Ulysses, but the Odyssey by Homer. So I'm just going to put in here um, the Odyssey. That's going to be our mind map. And now I can start a blank mind map. This could be I could do this with a student. Say, let's generate some ideas about this poem that we're studying in class. Or I could say, all right, how about we get AI to start us off, and then we'll go from there. So what do I want to mind map? The poem, The Odyssey by Homer, um, the journey of Odysseus. How's it spelled? um, uh, um, um, the journey of Odysseus. That's fine. Now you can see here I've got neuro settings, which this app actually taps into. You can do like clear and concise sentences, simplified language, so that easy English, simple English representation of text. You can also include a special interest or a passion that the student has. So if the student really loves Star Wars, but you're doing like, a topic that's not directly related to Star Wars, you can pop it in and it'll try to find ways to infuse that interest in with the topic in this sort of mind map, which is quite interesting. Thank you, Catherine. That's really nice feedback in the chat box, and Adriana too. So I'll just pop here. That's fine. I want you to explain this within a mind map. Images, yes, please. Notes, I'd love that too, and I'll show you what that means. So what's going to happen now is AOA taps into its AI brain. It's going to create a little visual mind map here. Okay, so we've got the Odyssey by Homer. We've got the journey. You can see it started to mind map some parts of that out. Departure from Troy, some of the major challenges in the return home. I like that. It's like made a nice three-part structure. And over any of these, I can hover my mouse and it'll say, okay, Odysseus leaves Troy after the war ends. Tell me about the Lotus Eaters, the encounter with people who consume a plant causing forgetfulness. So it's done a really nice little visual mind map of what I've asked it to do there. And now the student could take that further. So we could say, okay, we're now going to think about, well, how do we interpret the Odyssey through like the modern world? How does it relate to things that happen now? And so we could talk about, and we could extend this out and say modern times, and then the student could reference some of these things here and then think about how that relates to life now. And again, if they get stuck and we need to get a little bit of AI support, we can actually now say, hey, now help me to think about the ways that the Odyssey relates to modern times and give me some ideas to launch from here. And it'll keep building out the mind map in different ways. I love, Ezra, your comment there in the chat box about how it could be useful for newcomers to Australia with English as a second language. Absolutely. I think word banks, visual dictionaries, mind maps, and to me, this sort of thing is a really good example of how universal design can point us in directions like this to say this could be an assessment task. Like this doesn't need to be an essay or doesn't have to be a written response that students do about the Odyssey. It should be an accessible resource that students can create a visual mind map, add their own notes in, and this can be assessed. Like this to me is really interesting to think about from that standpoint too. I'll show you something else that AOA does that I really like. You can actually also drop in YouTube videos or websites. So say I do another mind map, but this time, instead of generating the ideas with AI, I want to import a YouTube video, or I'll drop a PDF in, and I'll show you one that I've created earlier. And Sabrina, absolutely, please share the recording with anyone who finds it useful. I'll upload the video to the website tomorrow. I like a writer named Anne Carson, and I dropped in a lecture of Anne's, or maybe I need to refresh the page. Too many things at once. So I dropped in a YouTube lecture of Anne's into AOA, and it broke the lecture down into 6 different parts. And then as I increase this bar, you can see it actually has taken all of the YouTube content and spun it out into different like bits of content, that you can then read more about, snip bits from, explore, expand. And I share this with a view. You might look at this and think that's very overwhelming, and that's a lot of content. But we think about AI and its use across the spectrum of schooling, right through from those universal sandpit tools, which you might think, well, some of this stuff is particularly pertinent to, the early years of teaching, perhaps, or some primary school focus here, right through to, this really detailed visual mapping of content that maybe is more suitable for high school, for example. So I think it all fits into as an age spectrum, as well. Now, I'm conscious, always happens to me, 7:45, I said I was going to cut things off. If for those who want to stay around for another 5 minutes, I've got one more sort of set of tools and things that I'd like to share with you. And I'm actually particularly thank you, Romina. That's fantastic. I'm going to go back to something that was in the chat box earlier about sensory that was mentioned there by Ash in the chat box. And so this what I'm going to share with you is what I was going to go into earlier. That was a bit about ChatGPT, which again, I'm conscious that not everybody uses ChatGPT. If you're in the Department of Ed, you might have EduChat. Catholic schools, you might have Copilot. Like I'm conscious of that, but I do want to share with you what some of these tools can do in ways that might be a little bit different from what you've otherwise experienced. I really like ChatGPT for 2 reasons. One is that you can interact with the world with it in really interesting ways. You've got voice mode, and I know people get sick of me doing this, but if you've never, I'll just stop my screen for a moment. If you've never seen it, so ChatGPT, I've got it on my phone, and I can push a little button that starts voice mode, and I'll just do it very quick now. Hi, I've got a webinar here. It's like 10 to 8 at night in Newcastle, and I'm working with a bunch of webinar attendees. We're talking about AI and autistic education, and I want to sort of demonstrate how you work as my like virtual assistant within ChatGPT. Could you just say hi to everybody?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to say hi. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I'm here to help out Craig with anything he needs during this webinar. So if Craig throws any questions my way, I'll do my best to be as helpful as I can. Hope you're all having a good evening.
So it really is like the most remarkable tool for talking and having that instant like speech to text and the back and forth, the voice, Melissa. But I'm going to show you something beyond voice. You can turn on the camera. Now, I'm conscious I've said a lot. I'm just going to turn on the camera now. Is that okay?
Of course, that's totally fine. Go ahead and turn it on whenever you're ready. It's definitely pretty neat that we can do this little back and forth live. So once we have the camera on, just let me know what you'd like to show or demonstrate, and I'll be here to chat about it.
All right, so I can turn on the camera and now ChatGPT can see whatever I can see, which I could even point it at a book. So I've got a complex book here, and I'm going to sort of just point it at a page here. Now, can you simplify exactly what I've just opened here? Because this is very complex and I've no idea what it's about. Explain it to me like I'm 6 years old.
Sure, I can see what you've got there. So basically, this page is talking about how a big idea or an important event can change the way people think about everything around them. It's like saying when one new really big thing happens, it can change all the rules and how people understand stuff. But don't worry, it's just a fancy way of saying sometimes New ID Guy can make us see the world differently.
All right, so that's enough of a demonstration. I love that you can point. So I get books and I think I've read that page and have no idea what that means. I point ChatGPT at it, say, you tell me what this means, and it breaks it down, which, I mean, just think about that. Like for high school students thinking, I've read this same page 7 times, I need someone else to help me interpret it, you know? Yeah, so a few good things there. I know Chris raised the question, is the voice in the free or paid versions? Marlene has mentioned it's in the free version. You get different levels of access and I guess different quantities of time essentially that you can spend talking to the chatbot, depending if it's the free version or the paid version. So that's sort of how that works. And it's not the only game in town. ChatGPT is not the only voice mode, but for me, it's the best. It's just so fluent. But why do I mention it? Why talk about it in that way? I'll show you some cool things that I've done, and I'm going to lead into the sensory question from earlier. This is an example I give because I love, and it's like real world example that I was doing a craft activity at home with my son, and it was rainy day. We had cardboard, paper, and he wanted me to create a conveyor belt because he's really into conveyor belts. And I tried to pull cardboard together and paper and sticky tape. And for the life of me, I just couldn't work out a way to make a cardboard conveyor belt. Hey, Shadi, I'll come back to that question in just a moment. So what I did, I pointed ChatGPT at our paper and cardboard on the table. I said, help me make a conveyor belt that's going to work with what I've got on the desk. Don't send me to Officeworks. Don't send me to Kmart. Just use what's on the table and let's make this work. And it thought about it, it looked at the resources, and it said, right, all you've got to do is make the cardboard a bit more textured, glue some more sticky tape, some more little bits of paper to it, make it taut, and then you'll see the conveyor belt start to turn. And that's exactly what happened, is that I followed ChatGPT's instructions, and with my son, we made a working conveyor belt, you know? And I just love that I'm able to point, AI at the world around us and say, help me fix this thing or help me understand this thing. That to me is like very, very powerful. I've also done it with students with creating games. Like we've only had limited resources in the classroom. And so I've said, all right, we've got these two robots, we've got some blocks of wood, some pencils, some dice. Make a game out of this, like let's make a board game that out of these things, point ChatGPT at it, and it creates rules based on those resources that students can then create a game, like a tabletop board game from those. Again, just ways of pointing the camera at the world and saying, help us solve this thing. I think that's great. Now, here's where I'm getting to. This is the last example of the night that I'll give you. I'm coming back and we'll get that. Before I do that, Shadia, the question that you asked about how accurate do I find ChatGPT, honestly, I find it's getting more and more accurate all the time. Version 5, which just launched, not the weekend just gone, but the one prior, so about 10 days ago, its hallucination rate is so much lower than the previous models. And I've been asking it thousands of questions across the past week and have found that it's been incredibly accurate. So I certainly wouldn't want to sit here and tell you to believe everything it says, because we know we shouldn't do that with AI. But I have found that it's doing pretty good, Shadia. So I think in that way it's quite good. All right. What I'm showing you here on the screen are that you can create your own, what they call custom GPTs in ChatGPT. Essentially, a custom chatbot to do a job that you've got in mind. And so I'll show you two, particularly a sensory planner, because there was the question about sensory, and then I'm going to show you location prep, and then we'll wrap things up. So I've created these tools. You don't have to have a paid ChatGPT account. You just have to, I think, have a free account, and then you can and I've got links for these, but you can essentially you find these custom GPTs. So just going to load it up there. I've done the right thing. Okay. So this is a sensory planner that I've made that you can use, and it's going to help to essentially plan for an environment that you're going to. So say you've got a class of students that you're taking to the library, so I'll say, I'm taking a class of students to the library, specifically the Newcastle Public Library. Now, the custom little chat, custom GPT that I've programmed, it's going to think about that and it's going to say, got it, a library trip, that's great. Before I suggest supports, tell me about your group. Are there any known? Marlene, you do need a paid account to create a custom GPT, but what you've said there is correct. Anyone can browse what's there for free and use them for free, but you do need a paid account to make your own. That's true. All right, so it's now asking, are there any known sensory sensitivities amongst the students? How many students are you going to bring? All right, so I'm going to say I've got 10 students. Some of the students are noise and light sensitive. Some are sensitive to busy crowds. I forgot to tell it the age. That's fine. And now it's going to create a bit of a plan. Okay, do you know if you'll mostly be in a children's section, a study space? Is it more for browsing? All right, we are visiting the local history section for research. Again, straight out of real life. And now it's going to, all right, here's what jumps out. There could be noise sensitivities. There might be background sounds, keyboards, whispers, light sensitive. And it's essentially a conversation, that's going back and forth. Do you want me to help to map out supports? Yes, please. Before, during, and after would be great. Always use nice manners, because once AI's, taken over, we want to be on the right side of it. So before the visit, preview the space, set sensory expectations, have resources and tools, plan those transitions from transport to library to the local history section. So you can see, I won't read through all of this, but as someone's just said, Sabrina, great risk assessment tool. And it's just a nice little way to think through some of those different considerations that might come up for sensory. I'll show you the other one that I just had here too, which is around location prep, just because I think this is quite an interesting one as well, and then we'll wrap things up. So I made this for a family member who they were on their way to the emergency ward at the hospital with their son. They didn't know what was wrong. They just knew they needed to go to emergency. And she's in the car and she's like, I don't have time to make a social story. I don't have time to generate or write anything. I'd love to just be able to tell AI, I'm going to the hospital, and it creates a guide as to what to expect at the hospital and some visuals to support that. So I could say, I'm taking my son to the emergency department at the hospital. And then the tool is then going to say, got it. And it's got a little bit of guide here. Here's what the emergency department looks like. When you first walk in, there's a reception area. You'll see rows of chairs in the waiting room, a TV on the wall, people coming in and out. There's some sensory things, noise, lights, crowds. Here's how the process goes. Check-in, triage, waiting. Do you want me to help make a visual preview, like a picture of what the waiting room might look like so he can see it? Yes, please. Again, just a little bit of, a quick social story, overview, sensory considerations for what's coming up. I think this stuff is quite interesting. Lisa, any issues with providing too many specific or personal details? Yeah, I think you've got to use your own caution here. I mean, earlier I said we're going to Newcastle Public Library. I think that's okay, but I wouldn't say I'm taking my 6-year-old son whose name is such and such to this particular hospital because I feel like he's got a diabetic related issue in this way. Like I I think you've got to use your own caution as you would with anything on the internet. You only give it what you're prepared to, I guess, share, even though AI feels like it's a very, it's like it's very difficult to know what you're going to get out of it in terms of what you put in. But the advice from all of the AI companies is please don't tell AI anything that you don't want to have shared later because it could come back out. So I think that's, a good guidance. I'd never upload photos of students, of course, or anything like that. So I think you've got to sort of take all that with caution. Just going through the chat box, I know we're about to wrap things up. It's 8 o'clock on the Eastern Seaboard. You can see I just said yes to creating an image of the emergency ward, and it's now going through and sort of generating that. It usually takes about a minute, to generate a nice high quality picture. We probably don't need to wait for the whole thing, but there's also part of me that does want to wait just to see what the emergency ward looks like. But again, and it was mentioned earlier, but if you are interested in like custom GPTs, you can just browse for free within ChatGPT, and it shows you what others have made. But mine are up on the website and able to be linked to. All right, so it's starting to paint a picture. I'll go back to the session here just to absolutely finish off because it's now 8:01, just to say thank you for being with me this evening. Thank you for spending this time. I think it would be useful if you want to have a think about how you use tech, in your life. Think about all the little accessibility tools you probably use: calendars, notes, timers, reminders. Think about how AI might start to change those over time, because I think it will. And whether you'll find that useful or the ways you might think that could impact our students in the future. And then it'd be great for you to like pick a tool from the webinar that we've been through. Think about how that could be used to support an inclusive need at your school, support an autistic student, and just have a little bit of a tinker, because I think that would be interesting. I've got you know where to find PP online: LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. We're all over the place to stay connected with what we're doing. But thank you again. I know Chris shared a link to some feedback. If you've got time to complete that link, Chris has just popped it in the chat box again, or scan the QR code. It'd be great for us to improve upon these webinars. Any extra questions or feedback that you've got, that's great. Like I said, I'll pop the webinar recording up onto the website tomorrow. I'll email everybody. You'll also have the website with the PDF of the slides to download, links on the website as well. Also, oh, look at this, our full emergency. That looks just like my local emergency department. All right. Also on the website for Positive Partnerships AI, we've got webinar recordings from last year as well, which have interesting resources. There are the slides, and these are the links to some of the resources that I've shared during this session. So they'll be all there with you. I've also got links from our previous webinars, including research and frameworks like the Australian Framework for Generative AI, tools for students, tools for teachers, other things I haven't covered in this session. So, and please stay in touch. You've got my email. If I can point you in the direction of anything in the future, let me know. And please feel free to share these on with anyone who you're working with, and hopefully they can be of support. So thanks again. It's been lovely to spend this evening with you. I'll start to shut things down now, so you're not awkwardly staring at my face as I sit here and watch the minutes count down. If you do have a question and you didn't get a chance to put in the chat box, just send me an email. Otherwise, have a good night. Thanks, guys.